Hello there. Once again, this is Paul Glumaz with General Welfare Presents. And today is the 20th of September, 2020. And I want to start with something that Trump did on Thursday, September 17th, which was Constitution Day. And he did this at the National Archive Museum. Okay, he used this occasion at the Repository of National Historical Documents to give a speech on American history in the context of a panel of 8 historians giving each 10-minute speeches, which were introduced by Ben Carson. At the event, the president signed an executive order creating the 1776 Foundation to promote the actual history and accomplishments of the United States since the founding, which have been pilloried, distorted, desecrated since historical revision began when the Morgans and the Mellons became dominant and on behalf of the British imperial orientation in the late 1890s. So ever since the late 1890s, the turn of the century, there's been a historical revisionist movement in the U.S. to revise history, to block out any idea that the founding fathers had intentions to create a free society or development or anything, that they were just merely the same kind of rapacious individuals that existed in the British Empire that were trying to loot the colonies, but it was the founding fathers who wanted to loot it for themselves. That's revisionist history that was began at the turn of the century in 1900s. And from there, we continue on over 120 years into the modern form of revisionist history, which is critical race theory and Black Lives Matter and cancel culture. And this has been one generation after another of an attempt to rewrite history from the standpoint of a bestial-like conception of man, and then invert that the other way around to those who were the victims of that bestial conception, and a complete deconstruction and destruction of any idea of the exceptionalism in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the American Revolution, and efforts to eliminate slavery, the work of Hamilton, later the work of Lincoln and FDR. During the period of this movement, a revival was begun to rescue Hamilton and the American system and defeat historical revisionism. And this movement has been ongoing, and it was led by Lyndon LaRouche starting in the late 70s. And we kept alive this idea of what the United States really represented, which was not what the policies of the Vietnam War and the policies of geopolitics and the policies of all these other policies, but rather the real America was based on the idea of a certain concept of creativity and freedom, a society where people can prosper and progress and contribute to the development of the nation. And in large part, Trump has brought that long-term battle of the LaRouche movement to the front in his way. And Trump has initiated a revival of this principle of American exceptionalism and its history. And this is very significant. Trump could go on this law and order kind of campaign, vote for my campaign, I'll restore order. No. He actually went after the underlying 30 years of education of young people that is at the root of the riots that are going on right now, at the root of Antifa, at the root of Black Lives Matter. And this is very important because it has the potential of reversing a number of very key problems. One is the long-term effects of the counterculture from the 68s, because the Vietnam War and the counterculture, the cynicism about America became dominant within the elite of that generation. And that cynicism played a key role in many of these people of that generation going on to become billionaires and profit through looting and plundering, because they were cynical about America. They were cynical about any kind of principle behind America. So also a significance of this is that Trump is presenting a positive conception of what for which America existed. That it was the fruit of 1,000 years of civilization, of Western civilization, and that it initiated the process that ended and ultimately ended slavery, and that this American quality is what he is now reviving. This is what he's now going to promote in the educational system, and this is very significant because he publicly went after the critical race theory and counterculture. This is very important. He singled out specifically Howard Zinn's fraudulent A People's History of the United States, which also is a continuation of the revisionism that was begun in the early 1900s by Baird. So one should watch or read the text of this speech. I think it would have an impact on you. So I'm going to go through some quick quotes on that. Whether it is the mob in the street or the cancel culture in the boardroom, the goal is the same: to silence dissent, to scare people out of speaking the truth, and bully Americans into abandoning their values, their heritage, and their way of life. Okay? Another quote. A perfect example of critical race theory was recently published by the Smithsonian Institute. This document alleged that concepts such as hard work, rational thinking, the nuclear family, and belief in God were not values that unite all Americans, but rather were instead aspects of whiteness. Okay, this is key. But even more important than that, in my view, if you start to present a positive conception of what America is, and that is revived as an identity for Americans, it also stops the wars. It also ends this whole war thing. Because what is the war, all of these wars based on? It's based on a different conception of American, which is that you're anti-communist, you're anti-terrorist, you're anti-this, you're anti-that. This is what happened in the 50s and 60s when you had the McCarthy period and you had this witch hunt against communism. And we began to refer to ourselves as defending the free world against communism. That was your identity, defending the free world against communism. But in that process of accepting that identity, we dropped the very idea of the positive sense of who we were. And so it became a reactionary thing. We need to impose democracy on the world. Why? Because it's the enemy. The enemy is the non-democracy. But of course, the enemy is this, the enemy is that. The enemy, and this is how we have been functioning, and this is what justifies the entire military-industrial complex. This is what justifies the whole situation, is this identity. We have, Russia's the enemy, China's the enemy, terrorism is the enemy, Islam is the enemy. But if you instead identify and affirm, because this is key, affirmative, who we are, then that whole concept ends, that the rest of the world's our enemy. We are this, and that's who we are. We're not out there to fight everybody on the planet because they're the enemy. And so this is very significant, I think. So as we go into this situation, something has become very apparent, that this military-industrial complex, which is totally integrated with the London Wall Street financial system, which is totally integrated with the people of the revolving door between the government, the financial system, the military, and so forth. We're talking 30 years of this, which is why Trump has problems picking somebody, because he's not part of any of that, and that is what it is. Maybe General Michael Flynn was the closest thing to somebody who was opposed to that. So what we have is a situation where it's what's being promoted right now is preparations for a military coup in a contested election. And so despite everything, despite the COVID-19 and the endless drumbeat against Trump, the enthusiasm for Trump is growing all over the country. You see this in massive boat parades and car parades and people showing up. It's the enthusiasm. He's sparking something deep in the American people, a sense of affirmation of themselves, not the negation of themselves. This is very important. And he's going out to the people, and the people are responding. The polls, which really don't measure this, are shifting somewhat. And then this brings to mind the quote in Woodward's book where General Mattis is talking to Dan Coates, head of the DNI, Director of Intelligence, National Intelligence, where he says to Coates, there may come a time when we have to take collective action. And it is around this time in 2018 that the policy document came out from McMaster of the National Security that Russia and China are the adversaries. So the entire U.S. military has now been driven into a Russia and China are the adversaries, backed up by the Republicans and the Democrats in the Congress, leaving Trump on a hook, pretty much out there. And it's about the same time that where Mattis resigns because Trump is talking about removing the troops. It's precisely at that time that you begin to have this drumbeat for confrontation with Russia and China, for war with Russia and China. So now, ever since Bush Sr. and the government created by George Shultz, which was Bush Jr.'s government, this is the deep state, this is the empire, this is the whole thing, and it is now facing an end to its existence in a second term of Donald Trump. So let's go back to January 30th, 2017, 10 days after Trump's inauguration. A prominent professor by the name of Rosa Brooks wrote an article for Foreign Policy entitled 3 Ways to Get Rid of President Trump Before 2020. So the first lines in her article are the following. Are we really stuck with this guy? It's the question being asked around the globe. Because Donald Trump's first week as president has made it all too clear. Yes, he is crazy, as everyone feared. And at the end of the article, she discusses the another way, the fourth way, which is the potential for a military coup. Then 9 months later, in September 7th, 2017, there was an article in a online public called The Conversation, which is based out of Australia, which is connected to British intelligence, which is entitled Thinking the Unthinkable. Could there be a military coup in the U.S.? And it goes through the two basic requirements for the coup, which would be a massive lockdown or shutdown of all communications at the start of the coup. And secondly, the securing physically of President Trump so that he can't do what the president of Turkey did and mobilize the citizenry. And the article goes into also what kind of military deployments you need, what parts of the military, U.S. military, have to be taken over, and so on and so forth. And it ends with a quote. This article is just a sketch. It has left out a lot of detailed planning that would actually be required for a real-life coup to happen. How could coup leaders deal with Congress, deal with armed resistance? Still, the point is clear. A successful military coup in the U.S. is extremely unlikely, but under the right circumstances, it'd be far from impossible to achieve. Under the right circumstances. Now we come right to the present, or to the early part of, to the middle part of this year. The same Rosa Brooks, the professor who wrote the article for Foreign Policy, was the one who organized the Transition Integrity Project, which had the scenarios and had the games being played on these scenarios. Now, none of the players were pro-Trump. They were all anti-Trump, including the Republican players who played Trump in the games. And this article dismantles three very important things that they believe would have to be dismantled in order for this. One is that the concept of election night. In other words, the election doesn't end election night. It continues. 2, a determined campaign has the opportunity to contest the election into January 2021. 3, the administrative transition process may be highly disrupted. Okay. And in discussing all of this, it references heavily the mail-in ballot issue as key to the election. And decisions to contest, it says, will be made by political considerations rather than legal rules, which means Congress. Close elections may be resolved through exercise of power, not through the courts. In both ambiguous and a clear win for Trump, the strategy is to take the election into Congress January 6th. And when there's no clear resolution after January 20th, when it's not clear, that's when the military would come in to remove Trump. Or the military could come in earlier. But that is what they mean by under the right circumstances. So what's being created right now is the right circumstances. So you have Hillary and Bill Clinton saying that under no case should Biden concede. Under no case. And so forth and so on. So you have essentially, you're setting up this scenario which is going to be extra election. You're not in an election anymore. You're in something called extra elections, where the extra election part is more significant than the actual election itself, potentially more significant than the actual election itself. Now that brings me to the immediate subject of what happened recently in the passing of Chief Justice Ruth Ginsburg. Okay. So this is very significant, not just because Trump has the ability to appoint somebody who once passed would give the Supreme Court a 5-4 ruling, would give 5-4 more disposed to Trump. But if in this contested election, which is coming, where you have states that have never done mail-in ballots, and it's completely crazy. We know somebody in Michigan who owns a house where people used to live, and 6 ballots have arrived. These ballots are going out to people, and there's no safeguards. And they've never done a mail-in ballot. In Washington State, people have been doing it for a while. So you're going to have contested elections. You're going to have congressional contested elections, senatorial contested elections. You're going to have presidential contested elections. And then it's a question of how do you decide when there's like the Chad issue back in 2000 in Florida? How do you decide? And that went to the Supreme Court. So you have all these contestants going into court. It ultimately will go into the Supreme Court. And if you have 5-4 judges against Trump, that's very significant than 5-4 judges in favor of Trump. Right now, it's 4-4. And when you have a tie in the Supreme Court, how does that resolve? I'm not sure. So that begins to give you a sense of why there's going to be this why there's probably going to be this huge battle going on around the appointment of a chief of the replacement to Ginsburg, and why Antifa's going to be there. Everybody's going to be there. It's going to be a total mess, because that could be the determining factor in who gets to be president in an ambiguous or Trump election, an ambiguous result, or a Trump election. So this is what you're looking at. So stay tuned. I appreciate those who come on and listen to all my discussions, and I'll see you in a week. Take care.